The sound of laughter drifted through the crack in the private dining room door as I balanced a tray of champagne glasses in my trembling hands. 3 months of working as a server at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant had taught me to move silently, to become invisible among the wealthy elite who treated staff like furniture. Tonight, that invisibility would reveal a truth that would shatter my world. Through the narrow opening, I saw Madison seated at the center of an opulent table, her designer dress catching the light as she raised her wine glass. The same woman who had tearfully told me we could only afford thrift store clothing now wore a custom Valentino gown worth more than my monthly salary from all 3 jobs combined. Beside her sat Trevor, the man she claimed to have left behind years ago. His arm draped possessively around her shoulders as their college friends surrounded them, faces flushed with expensive wine and cruel amusement. Someone raised a toast. I should have walked away, but my feet remained rooted to the marble floor. Madison's voice carried clearly through the gap. She was laughing, actually laughing, as she spoke about our marriage. The words hit me like physical blows. She described how exhausting it was to maintain the charade of loving me, how she had to force herself not to recoil when I touched her. The bankruptcy story she had spun was nothing more than an elaborate lie designed to make me so miserable that I would beg for a divorce. Trevor smirked as he detailed my pathetic routine. 4 in the morning wake-ups for my warehouse job, lunch breaks spent running deliveries across the city. Evenings waiting tables until midnight, my feet bleeding in second-hand shoes. All while Madison met with interior designers for the penthouse apartment I never knew existed. The champagne glass slipped from the tray, shattering against her floor. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot, but the laughter from inside continued. They were betting on how much longer I could last before my body gave out completely. 6 months was the consensus. They found my dedication hilarious. Madison raised her glass again, her voice dripping with mock sentiment. She toasted to the most entertaining performance of her life, playing the devoted wife while planning her escape to the man she truly loved. The man who had never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. The man who had never walked 12 miles in the rain because bus fare meant less money for her fake medical bills. My hands shook as I set down the tray and walked away from the door. The manager's protests about my sudden departure faded into background noise. Nothing mattered except getting out of this place, away from the sound of their celebration over my suffering. The night air hit my face as I stepped onto 5th Avenue, but I felt nothing. 3 months of grinding poverty, of rationing meals so Madison could eat, of working myself to exhaustion while she planned her future with another man. The woman I had loved since childhood had orchestrated the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined. As I walked toward the subway station, one thought crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. Tomorrow, I would give Madison exactly what she wanted, but not in the way she expected. Madison and I had been inseparable since the day her family moved next door when we were 7 years old. Our parents joked that we were destined for each other, 2 kids who spent every waking moment together, building forts in my backyard and sharing ice cream on her front porch. She was the girl who held my hand during thunderstorms and promised we would never be apart. The Hartwell and Chen families had been friends for decades before our births, business partners who had built their wealth together in the early days of tech investing. My father, Robert Chen, and Madison's father, James Hartwell, often spoke of uniting their families officially someday. Madison and I would laugh at their old-fashioned ideas, but secretly, I hoped they were right. Throughout elementary and middle school, we were that couple everyone expected to end up together. Madison would wear my jacket during lunch, and I would carry her books between classes. She came to every basketball game, cheering louder than anyone else in the stands. When she got sick with pneumonia in 8th grade, I sat by her hospital bed reading her favorite books aloud until visiting hours ended. High school brought new challenges, but our bond only grew stronger. Madison struggled with math, so I tutored her every afternoon in the library. When her grandmother passed away junior year, I held her while she cried and helped her write the eulogy. She was there when I broke my leg during senior year playoffs, visiting every day with homemade cookies and updates from school. College acceptance letters arrived in spring, and our perfect world began to crack. Madison's grades weren't strong enough for the universities I had been accepted to. While I received offers from Princeton and Yale, she was headed to a state school 300 miles away. The night before graduation, we sat on the hill behind our high ski pool where we had shared our first kiss. Madison cried as she made me promise to wait for her. 4 years felt like forever when you were 18 and desperately in love. She promised that distance wouldn't change anything between us, that she would transfer to be closer to me as soon as possible. I believed every word because I couldn't imagine a future without her. The first year of college tested our relationship in ways we hadn't anticipated. Video calls replaced hand-holding. Text messages substituted for shared meals. I turned down invitations to parties and dates with other girls, keeping my promise to Madison while building my future in business school. My roommates called me crazy for limiting myself to a long-distance relationship, but I knew what Madison and I had was worth preserving. Madison's calls became less frequent during her sophomore year. She talked about new friends, exciting classes, and professors who inspired her. She mentioned a study group leader named Trevor Blackwood who was helping her with economics. I felt a twinge of jealousy but pushed it aside. Madison had always been friendly and outgoing. It was natural for her to form new friendships. The distance grew more pronounced during my junior year. Madison would go days without returning my calls, claiming she was buried in coursework or dealing with family issues. When we did talk, she seemed distracted, her responses short and disinterested. I started planning surprise visits, but she always had reasons why the timing wasn't right. Everything changed the night I received the call about my parents' car accident. The drunk driver had run the red light at 60 miles per hour, killing both my mother and father instantly. I was 21 years old and suddenly orphan, heir to the family business, and drowning in grief I couldn't process. Madison flew back immediately for the funeral. She held my hand during the service and stayed by my side as relatives I barely knew offered hollow condolences. For a week, it felt like we were teenagers again, supporting each other through the worst crisis of our lives. She helped me sort through my parents' belongings and held me when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. James Hartwell pulled me aside after the memorial service, his face grave with concern for both his daughter and me. He suggested that Madison and I should consider marriage sooner rather than later. The family businesses needed stability, and I needed support during this transition. More importantly, he said, Madison needed direction. She had been struggling academically and socially at college, and perhaps coming home to build a life with me would provide the purpose she was seeking. Madison initially resisted the idea. She had 1 more year of college to complete, and there was Trevor to consider. She didn't say the last part aloud, but I could see it in her eyes. However, something changed her mind over the following weeks. Maybe it was seeing me struggle to manage everything alone, or maybe it was pressure from her family. She agreed to transfer to a local college and begin planning our future together. Our engagement was announced 6 months after my parents' death. Madison threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that eased my concerns about rushing into marriage. She seemed genuinely excited about our future, talking about the house we would buy and the children we would have. The girl I had loved since childhood was finally ready to become my wife. The wedding was everything Madison had dreamed of as a little girl. She looked radiant walking down the aisle in her grandmother's restored dress, and I felt certain that we had weathered the worst storms life could throw at us. Our families celebrated the union they had hoped for since we were children, and I believed we were beginning the happiest chapter of our lives. What I didn't know was that Trevor had followed Madison back home, accepting a position at a local investment firm. What I didn't know was that Madison had agreed to marry me only after Trevor had broken up with her, claiming he wasn't ready for the commitment she wanted. What I didn't know was that my wife was already planning her exit strategy before we had even returned from our honeymoon. For 2 years, I worked tirelessly to build the life Madison deserved while managing my family's growing business empire. I surprised her with expensive jewelry, planned romantic getaways, and listened patiently when she complained about feeling trapped in our small town. I thought I was being the husband she needed. I thought our love was strong enough to overcome any challenge. I never suspected that the woman sharing my bed was counting down the days until she could escape to the arms of another man. The Hartwell Group's bankruptcy announcement came on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered through tears and trembling hands as Madison showed me the legal documents. Her father's investment firm had collapsed overnight, she explained, destroyed by a series of bad deals and market manipulation charges. The family faced criminal investigations, frozen assets, and debts that exceeded $50 million. Madison wept as she described phone calls from creditors, threats from investors, and the humiliation of watching federal agents seize everything her family had built. She showed me newspaper clippings about her father's arrest, social media posts mocking the Hartwell name, and legal notices demanding immediate payment of outstanding loans. I held my sobbing wife as she begged me to help save her family from complete destruction. The business my parents had built was worth approximately $30 million, enough to make a significant dent in the Hartwell debts, but not enough to eliminate them entirely. Madison pleaded with me to sell everything, to liquidate our entire inheritance to give her parents a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. The decision felt like betraying my parents' memory, but I couldn't watch the woman I loved suffer while I possessed the means to help. Within 2 weeks, I had signed papers transferring ownership of Chen Industries to a group of investors Madison had found. The sale price was $15 million below market value, but Madison insisted speed was more important than maximizing profit. Her family's creditors were circling like vultures, and every day of delay meant higher legal fees and more aggressive collection efforts. The money disappeared into the Hartwell debt with alarming speed. Madison explained that the legal fees alone consumed millions, while back taxes and penalties devoured the rest. She showed me receipts and payment confirmations, evidence of funds flowing to lawyers and government agencies. Still, it wasn't enough. The family needed more time, more money, more sacrifice from both of us. Madison suggested we downsize our lifestyle immediately to demonstrate our commitment to financial responsibility. We moved from our suburban home to a cramped apartment in a rundown complex across town. She sold her jewelry and designer clothing, keeping only basic necessities. We cancelled our country club memberships, discontinued our housekeeper and gardener, and began shopping at discount grocery stores. The austerity measures felt noble at first, a way of showing solidarity with Madison's family during their darkest hour. But as weeks turned into months, the sacrifices became increasingly difficult to bear. Our savings account dwindled as Madison discovered new expenses related to her family's legal battles. Emergency attorney fees, forensic accounting costs, and settlement negotiations required constant infusions of cash. I took a second job delivering packages during lunch breaks from my primary work managing what remained of the family investments. The physical demands left me exhausted, but Madison praised my dedication and promised that our sacrifices would be temporary. Her father's lawyers were negotiating a plea agreement that would reduce the family's financial obligations significantly. By summer, even 2 jobs weren't generating enough income to meet our needs. Madison had discovered that several of her father's business associates were demanding personal guarantees on loans they claimed he had co-signed. The amounts were staggering, and failure to pay could result in criminal charges against Madison herself as a beneficiary of her father's allegedly fraudulent activities. I added weekend warehouse work to my schedule, spending Saturdays loading trucks and Sundays processing inventory. The physical labor left my hands blistered and my back aching, but the overtime pay helped cover Madison's mounting legal expenses. She would massage my shoulders when I came home, apologizing for the burden her family's problems had placed on our marriage. The third job came in September when Madison tearfully revealed that her mother needed experimental medical treatment, not covered by insurance. The procedure cost $20,000 up front, money we didn't possess despite my grueling work schedule. I swallowed my pride and took an evening position serving tables at Meridian, the upscale restaurant where Manhattan's elites celebrated their success. Walking to work became a necessity when we could no longer afford gas for both our commutes. The 3-mile trek from our apartment to the restaurant took 45 minutes each way, but saving $15 daily on transportation costs meant more money for Madison's family obligations. My feet developed permanent blisters, and my cheap work shoes fell apart twice before I found a pair sturdy enough to withstand the daily punishment. Madison adapted to our reduced circumstances with remarkable grace, or so I believed. She shopped carefully, prepared simple meals, and wore the same modest outfits week after week. She rarely complained about our living conditions or the uncertainty surrounding our future. Instead, she spoke optimistically about the day when her family's legal troubles would be resolved and we could rebuild our life together. The suspicious details were small at first, easily explained by circumstances I didn't fully understand. Madison received phone calls she claimed were from lawyers, but the conversation seemed too casual and cheerful for legal consultations. She would step outside or go to another room, speaking in low tones that suggested intimate conversations rather than professional discussions. Her schedules became increasingly unpredictable. She claimed to be meeting with financial advisors and legal consultants, appointments that lasted for hours and sometimes extended into the evening. When I offered to accompany her to these meetings, she always had reasons why my presence would be inappropriate or counterproductive. Madison's wardrobe puzzled me most of all. Despite our financial constraints, she occasionally appeared to have new clothing items that she claimed were gifts from sympathetic friends or borrowed from charitable organizations. The quality seemed too high for second-hand items and the styles were too current for donations, but I was too exhausted from working to question her explanations thoroughly. The restaurant job provided an unexpected window into Madison's world. Meridian served the same social circle Madison had grown up with, the wealthy families whose children had been her classmates and friends. Several times, I overheard conversations about the Hartwell bankruptcy, but the details never matched the story Madison had told me. According to restaurant gossip, James Hartwell had been arrested but released on bail within hours. The family's assets had been frozen temporarily but were being released gradually as investigations proceeded. Most surprisingly, several diners mentioned seeing Madison at social events, describing her as looking healthy and well-dressed despite her family's supposed financial ruin. I confronted Madison about these discrepancies, but she had explanations for everything. Her father's legal team was managing his public image carefully, she said, ensuring he appeared stable and confident to prevent further damage to the family's reputation. She attended social functions reluctantly, borrowing clothes and maintaining appearances to preserve important business relationships that might help with their eventual recovery. Her explanations were plausible, and my exhaustion made it difficult to pursue inconsistencies aggressively. I was working 16-hour days, surviving on 4 hours of sleep, and struggling to process information clearly. Madison seemed genuinely grateful for my sacrifices, and her appreciation felt like validation that our struggles were meaningful and temporary. The night I discovered the truth, I had been serving at Meridian for 3 months. My body was breaking down from the constant physical demands, but the overtime money was helping us stay current on Madison's family obligations. I never expected to see my wife laughing and celebrating in the restaurant's most exclusive private dining room, wearing clothes that cost more than I earned in a month, toasting to the success of her elaborate deception. The walk home from Meridian took 2 hours that night, though I remember none of it. My mind replayed the conversation I had overheard, searching desperately for alternative explanations that might preserve some shred of the reality I thought I knew. Perhaps I had misunderstood. Perhaps Madison had been forced to maintain appearances for reasons she couldn't share with me. Perhaps there was still some truth buried beneath the layers of deception. But deep in my chest, beneath the shock and disbelief, a cold certainty was crystallizing. The woman I had loved since childhood, the person I had trusted with my heart and my future, had orchestrated the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined. She had watched me work myself into the ground, had massaged my aching shoulders while planning her escape, had accepted my sacrifices while laughing about them with her friends. I reached our apartment at nearly 2 in the morning. Madison was already asleep, or pretending to be, curled beneath the thin blankets we had bought at a discount store. In the darkness, I studied her face, searching for signs of the person I thought I knew. She looked peaceful, innocent even, her features soft in the dim light filtering through our cheap curtains. Sleep was impossible. I sat in our tiny kitchen, staring at the stack of bills Madison claimed were legal expenses, the collection notices she said were related to her father's debts, the medical statements for her mother's supposed treatments. Everything looked authentic, official, convincing. She had created an entire fictional crisis, complete with documentation and evidence, all to manipulate me into destroying my own life. The next morning arrived with cruel normalcy. Madison woke cheerfully, kissing my cheek and asking about my shift at the restaurant. She made coffee with the generic brand we bought to save money, toasted Betrayal, that was 2 days past its expiration date, and chatted about her plans to meet with another lawyer regarding her family's situation. I watched her performance with new understanding. Every gesture, every expression of concern, every word of gratitude was calculated to maintain the illusion she had created. She was an actress playing a role, and I had been her unwitting audience for months. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to scream and demand explanations and unleash all the rage building inside me. But a larger part recognized that anger would accomplish nothing. Madison had made her choices deliberately, with full knowledge of the pain she was causing. She had decided that my love was worthless, that my sacrifices were meaningless, that my trust was something to be exploited rather than treasured. I called in sick to all 3 jobs that day, claiming food poisoning. Madison seemed genuinely concerned, offering to bring me soup and medicine, fussing over my temperature and encouraging me to rest. Her care felt like acid poured into an open wound. Even her sympathy was part of the performance. Alone in our apartment, I began to investigate the story Madison had constructed. Phone calls to the courthouse revealed that James Hartwell had indeed been arrested, but the charges were minor regulatory violations that had been resolved with fines and probation. There was no federal investigation, no frozen assets, no criminal conspiracy. The medical bills for Madison's mother were more difficult to verify, but a call to the hospital's billing department confirmed my suspicions. No patient by that name had received treatment there, the insurance claims were forgeries, the payment receipts were fabricated, the entire medical crisis was fiction. Each discovery felt like another betrayal, another layer of lies peeled away to reveal the scope of Madison's deception. She hadn't simply fallen out of love with me or decided our marriage was a mistake. She had deliberately and systematically destroyed my life to achieve her goals, using my devotion to her as a weapon against me. The full picture became clear when I hired a private investigator with money borrowed against my wedding ring. Trevor Blackwood had never left Madison's life. He had followed her home after college, accepting a position at a prestigious investment firm downtown. They had been meeting regularly throughout our marriage, maintaining their relationship while she played the role of devoted wife. The investigator's photographs showed Madison and Trevor at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and exclusive events throughout the city. She wore designer clothing and jewelry that would have cost more than my combined annual salary from all 3 jobs. They looked happy, carefree, completely unburdened by the financial constraints that had dominated my life for months. The bankruptcy story had been Trevor's idea, according to conversations the investigator had recorded. Madison had been reluctant to hurt me so directly, but Trevor had convinced her that a clean break was better than prolonged dishonesty. They had crafted the elaborate deception to make me so miserable that I would eventually beg for a divorce, freeing Madison to pursue her relationship with Trevor without guilt or legal complications. Madison returned home that evening with takeout food from an expensive restaurant, claiming a lawyer had bought her dinner during their consultation. She served me carefully, asking about my health and promising that our financial situation would improve soon. Her father's legal team had achieved a breakthrough, she said, and resolution was finally within reach. I ate the food and listened to her lies, marveling at her ability to maintain the performance even when we were alone. She seemed to believe her own story in those moments, or perhaps she was simply committed to playing her role until the end. Either way, her dedication to the deception was both impressive and revolting. That night, as Madison slept peacefully beside me, I made my decision. She wanted a divorce, and she would have one. But not in the way she had planned, not as the victim of circumstances beyond her control, not as the innocent party forced to choose between her family's survival and her marriage. She would get her divorce as exactly what she was, a manipulator whose lies had finally been exposed, a betrayer who had used love as a weapon. I would give Madison exactly what she wanted, but I would do it on my terms, with my dignity intact and my truth finally spoken. The naive young man who had believed in fairy tale love was dead, killed by months of exhaustion and manipulation. In his place stood someone harder, wiser, and completely immune to Madison's performance. The game she had been playing was about to end, and for the first time in months, I would be the one controlling the outcome. Madison had taught me that love could be weaponized, that trust could be exploited, that devotion could be turned into a tool of destruction, but she had also taught me something else, that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and that surviving betrayal was possible if you refused to let it define you. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming my life. Tonight, I allowed myself to grieve for the person I had been and the love I had believed in. Both were gone forever, casualties of Madison's war against the life we had built together. But I was still standing, still breathing, still capable of starting over. And that would have to be enough. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly once I presented evidence of Madison's deception to my attorney. Her lawyers initially tried to contest the settlement, claiming she deserved compensation for supporting me through my family's business crisis. But the photographs, financial records, and witness statements painted a clear picture of fraud and manipulation. Madison was forced to return significant assets and waive any claim to alimony. I used the recovered funds to purchase a modest home in Riverside Heights, a quiet neighborhood 40 minutes from downtown. The distance from our old social circles felt necessary for my healing process. I needed space to rebuild my life without constant reminders of the person I had been during those months of deception. The house needed work, which provided a therapeutic outlet for my frustration and anger. Weekends were spent renovating the kitchen, painting bedrooms, and landscaping the neglected garden. Physical labor reminded me that I was capable of creating something beautiful from damaged materials, a metaphor I found both obvious and comforting. My professional life recovered more quickly than I had expected. Several former clients of my father's business had reached out after learning about my divorce, offering investment opportunities and consulting contracts. Within 6 months, I had established Chen Consulting, a small firm specializing in risk management for family-owned businesses. The work was challenging and rewarding, requiring me to travel frequently and interact with successful entrepreneurs who respected my insights. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually stimulated rather than merely surviving from day to day. My confidence began to return along with my financial stability. Victoria Sterling entered my life during a business conference in Chicago. She was presenting a workshop on crisis management for small businesses, her expertise gained through 15 years of helping companies navigate financial difficulties. Her presentation was intelligent, practical, and delivered with the kind of confidence that comes from genuine knowledge rather than rehearsed performance. During the networking session, I approached her with questions about debt restructuring strategies for one of my clients. Our conversation extended through dinner and continued in the hotel bar until nearly midnight. Victoria was thoughtful, funny, and remarkably easy to talk to. She listened carefully to my questions and offered insights that revealed both professional competence and personal wisdom. We exchanged contact information and began corresponding regularly about business matters. Victoria's emails were warm and engaging, often including personal observations about her travels or funny stories from her consulting work. I found myself looking forward to her messages and taking extra care with my responses. 3 months after we met, Victoria accepted my invitation to visit Riverside Heights for a weekend. I showed her the progress on my house renovations, and she offered to help paint the guest bedroom. We worked side by side, talking about everything from childhood memories to career aspirations, sharing the kind of comfortable intimacy I hadn't experienced in years. Victoria was everything Madison had never been: genuine, supportive, and interested in building something together rather than taking from me. She praised my work on the house, admired my business accomplishments, and treated me with the respect I had forgotten I deserved. Being with her felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. Our relationship developed naturally over the following months. Victoria would visit Riverside Heights on weekends, and I would travel to her home in Portland during my business trips. We talked openly about our past relationships, our hopes for the future, and our fears about trusting again after previous disappointments. Victoria had been married briefly in her 20s to a man who had struggled with addiction issues. She understood the pain of loving someone who was fundamentally dishonest, the difficulty of rebuilding trust after betrayal. Her empathy came from experience rather than sympathy, which made her support feel authentic and valuable. 8 months after our first meeting, I asked Victoria to consider relocating to Riverside Heights permanently. My business was growing rapidly, and I needed someone I trusted to help manage the expansion. More importantly, I was ready to share my life with someone who would appreciate rather than exploit my devotion. Victoria accepted my proposal enthusiastically. She sold her Portland consulting practice and moved into my house, bringing her furniture, her books, and her remarkable ability to make any space feel like home. Within weeks, it was difficult to remember what my life had been like without her presence. We announced our relationship publicly at the Riverside Heights Chamber of Commerce dinner in November. I had been selected as Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and Victoria accompanied me to the awards ceremony. She looked radiant in a simple navy dress, her genuine pride in my accomplishments evident to everyone present. Madison learned about Victoria through social media, apparently. The first sign of her interest came in the form of a friend request on LinkedIn, which I declined immediately. Then she began following Victoria's Instagram account, liking photos and leaving comments that seemed friendly but felt intrusive to me. The phone calls started during the second week of December. Madison would call my office, claiming she needed to discuss financial matters related to our divorce settlement. When I refused to take her calls, she began leaving voicemails that grew increasingly emotional and irrational. In one message, she accused me of moving on too quickly, suggesting that my relationship with Victoria was a rebound romance that couldn't possibly be genuine. In another, she claimed that Victoria was clearly a gold digger who was taking advantage of my vulnerable emotional state. The messages revealed a level of obsession that was both concerning and pathetic. Madison showed up at my house on a Saturday morning in January, claiming she needed to retrieve personal items she had forgotten. Victoria was visiting that weekend, and the encounter between the two women was tense and uncomfortable. Madison was polite but cold, studying Victoria with obvious hostility while making veiled comments about our shared history. After Madison left, Victoria asked directly whether I was concerned about my ex-wife's behavior. I admitted that Madison's actions were escalating in ways that made me uncomfortable, but I hoped her interest would fade once she realized I was serious about moving forward. Victoria's response revealed both her strength and her understanding of the situation. She suggested we document Madison's contacts and set clear boundaries about acceptable behavior. If Madison continued to intrude on our lives, we would need to consider legal remedies. Victoria was prepared to fight for our relationship if necessary, but she preferred to handle the situation professionally rather than emotionally. The next incident occurred during a romantic dinner at Riverside Heights' most exclusive restaurant. Victoria and I were celebrating the one-year anniversary of our first meeting when Madison appeared at our table, uninvited and clearly intoxicated. She demanded to know why I was throwing away everything we had built together for someone I had known less than a year. The scene was embarrassing and painful, with other diners staring while Madison ranted about our childhood promises and shared history. Victoria remained calm throughout the confrontation, neither engaging with Madison's accusations nor retreating from her position beside me. Her composure contrasted sharply with Madison's hysteria, making it clear which woman deserved my loyalty. Hotel security eventually escorted Madison from the restaurant, but not before she promised that Victoria would never replace her in my heart. The threat was delivered with such conviction that several diners gasped audibly. Victoria took my hand as we watched Madison being led away, her touch steady and reassuring. That night, Victoria told me she loved me for the first time. She had been waiting for the right moment, she said, but seeing Madison's desperation had clarified her own feelings. She wanted to spend her life with me, to build something lasting and honest, to prove that real love was stronger than manipulation and obsession. I told Victoria I loved her too, and meant it completely. Madison had poisoned my ability to trust romantic love, but Victoria had slowly healed that damage through patience, consistency, and genuine care. She represented everything I had thought love should be before Madison taught me how wrong I could be. But as I held Victoria that night, I knew Madison's behavior would continue to escalate. She had demonstrated a willingness to destroy her own life to achieve her goals, and she clearly viewed Victoria as an obstacle to reclaiming what she considered rightfully hers. The real battle was just beginning, and I needed to be prepared to protect the woman who had given me back my faith in love itself. Madison's campaign against Victoria began subtly, with professional sabotage disguised as legitimate business competition. Sterling Consulting Group, the firm Victoria had sold before moving to Riverside Heights, suddenly faced a hostile takeover attempt from Hartwell Enterprises, the investment company Madison had inherited from her father. The timing was clearly deliberate, designed to force Victoria to return to Portland to defend her former business partners. Victoria refused to be manipulated. She contacted her former associates and arranged for them to retain independent legal counsel, then helped them develop a defense strategy from Riverside Heights. Her refusal to abandon our life together to fight Madison's proxy war seemed to enrage my ex-wife further. The harassment escalated to direct attacks on Victoria's new consulting clients. Anonymous complaints were filed with regulatory agencies, alleging improper financial advice and fraudulent business practices. The accusations were baseless, but they required Victoria to spend weeks documenting her professional history and providing evidence of her competence to various oversight boards. Madison hired private investigators to follow Victoria, photograph her daily activities, and search for any evidence of impropriety that could be used to discredit her reputation. The investigators were obvious and intrusive, parking outside our house, following Victoria to client meetings, and questioning neighbors about our relationship. I obtained a restraining order against Madison, prohibiting her from contacting either Victoria or me directly. Madison complied with the letter of the law while violating its spirit, using intermediaries and anonymous communications to continue her harassment campaign. Legal technicalities protected her from immediate consequences while making our lives increasingly difficult. The psychological warfare intensified when Madison began targeting Victoria's family members. Victoria's parents received anonymous packages containing photographs of Victoria and me together, along with newspaper clippings about Madison's supposedly tragic divorce from her childhood sweetheart. The messages implied that Victoria had destroyed a sacred romance for financial gain. Victoria's sister, a teacher in Portland, was contacted by someone claiming to represent a documentary film crew interested in stories about home-wrecking consultants who preyed on recently divorced men. The caller asked detailed questions about Victoria's dating history and financial motivations, clearly fishing for damaging information. Madison's attacks became more direct during Victoria's birthday celebration in March. We had reserved a private dining room at the Riverside Country Club for an intimate party with 12 close friends. Madison somehow gained access to the event, appearing during the toast portion of the evening dressed in a stunning gown that made her look like a grieving widow. She delivered a prepared speech about the sanctity of childhood love and the tragedy of marriages destroyed by opportunistic outsiders. Several guests were visibly uncomfortable, but Madison's delivery was so polished and emotional that some people seemed genuinely moved by her performance. She presented herself as the victim of a calculated seduction, a woman whose lifelong love had been stolen by a predatory stranger. Victoria maintained her composure throughout Madison's speech, refusing to provide the dramatic confrontation Madison clearly desired. When Madison finished her presentation and waited for a response, Victoria simply thanked her for sharing her perspective and suggested she leave before security became necessary. Madison's composure cracked at Victoria's dismissive response. She began screaming about Victoria's presumption, demanding to know how someone who had known me for less than 2 years could possibly understand the depth of a lifetime connection. She threw her wineglass at Victoria, barely missing her face, before charging across the room with obvious intent to cause physical harm. I intercepted Madison before she could reach Victoria, restraining her while she struggled and screamed. Several male guests helped escort her from the building while she continued to rant about Victoria's unworthiness and my supposed betrayal of everything sacred between us. The entire incident was captured on multiple phones and shared widely on social media within hours. The public humiliation seemed to push Madison beyond rational behavior entirely. She began showing up at my business meetings, confronting potential clients with warnings about my alleged instability and dishonesty. She claimed I was mentally damaged by our divorce and that Victoria was manipulating me for financial gain. Most clients ignored Madison's intrusions, but her behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and threatening. During one particularly disturbing incident, she followed Victoria to a client presentation and disrupted the meeting by screaming accusations through the conference room windows. Hotel security had to physically remove her from the premises. Victoria and I decided to accelerate our wedding plans, partly as a declaration of our commitment to each other and partly as a legal protection against Madison's escalating interference. We scheduled a small ceremony for June, inviting only immediate family members and closest friends to avoid providing Madison with another opportunity for disruption. Madison learned about our wedding plans within days of our decision. She immediately filed legal motions claiming that our marriage would constitute fraud against her property rights, arguing that my assets were partially hers under the original divorce settlement. The motions were frivolous, but they required expensive legal responses and created additional stress during what should have been a joyful time. The final confrontation occurred 3 weeks before our scheduled wedding. Madison had been conspicuously absent from our daily lives for several days, leading us to hope that she had finally accepted reality and moved on. Instead, she had been planning the most dramatic and dangerous escalation of her campaign. Victoria and I were returning from a romantic dinner when we found Madison waiting in our living room. She had somehow gained entry to our house and was sitting calmly on our sofa, surrounded by photographs from our childhood, newspaper clippings about our marriage and divorce, and what appeared to be legal documents. Madison looked terrible, clearly having lost significant weight and sleep during her obsessive pursuit of our destruction. But her voice was steady and determined as she explained that she had liquidated everything she owned to fund a comprehensive legal and financial attack on both Victoria and me. She had hired teams of lawyers, accountants, and investigators to examine every aspect of our relationship and business dealings. She claimed to have evidence of financial impropriety in my consulting business and professional misconduct in Victoria's client relationships. She was prepared to destroy both our careers and reputations if we proceeded with our wedding. Victoria called the police while Madison delivered her ultimatum, but my ex-wife seemed unconcerned about legal consequences. She had already lost everything that mattered to her, she said, and she was prepared to lose even more if that was what it took to prevent me from finding happiness with someone else. The police arrived and arrested Madison for breaking and entering, but not before she had made it clear that her campaign against us was far from over. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked directly at Victoria and promised that their battle was just beginning. The hatred in her eyes was unlike anything I had ever seen, even during our worst marital arguments. That night, Victoria and I sat in our violated living room, sorting through the photographs and documents Madison had scattered around our home. Many of the pictures showed Madison and me as children, reminders of the innocent love that had existed before manipulation and betrayal poisoned everything between us. Victoria asked whether I ever regretted ending my marriage to Madison, whether some part of me still believed in the possibility of reclaiming what we had once shared. I looked at the evidence of Madison's obsession spread across our coffee table and felt only pity for the person she had become. Madison had chosen to destroy the love between us through deception and manipulation. Now she was choosing to destroy herself through obsession and revenge. Both choices were hers to make, but I would not allow her self-destruction to consume the happiness Victoria and I had built together. The war Madison had declared was not really about love or justice or correcting past wrongs. It was about control, possession, and the inability to accept that some damage cannot be repaired. She would continue fighting until she had nothing left to lose, which meant Victoria and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. But we would face Madison's attacks together, as partners committed to protecting the genuine love we had discovered. Madison could destroy herself in pursuit of revenge, but she would not destroy us. We were stronger than her obsession, smarter than her schemes, and more committed to our future than she was to her past. The battle would continue, but we had already won the war. Madison's arrest for breaking and entering marked the beginning of her complete downfall, though she seemed unable to recognize the severity of her situation. She spent 2 days in jail before making bail, using her mother's jewelry as collateral since her liquid assets had been exhausted funding her campaign against Victoria and me. The criminal charges were just the beginning of Madison's legal troubles. Victoria had documented every instance of harassment, stalking, and business interference, creating a comprehensive case for both criminal prosecution and civil damages. The evidence painted a picture of systematic harassment that went far beyond the behavior of a disappointed ex-spouse. Madison's obsession had consumed her judgment completely. Rather than accepting plea bargains that would have minimized her legal exposure, she insisted on fighting every charge while simultaneously escalating her attacks on Victoria's business relationships. She seemed to believe that proving her devotion to our childhood love would somehow justify her increasingly criminal behavior. The trial became a public spectacle that destroyed what remained of Madison's reputation in our social circles. Testimony revealed the elaborate deception she had orchestrated during our marriage, the months of lies about her family's financial crisis, and the systematic way she had exploited my love to achieve her goals. More damaging were the recordings Victoria's investigators had obtained of Madison coaching her private investigators to fabricate evidence against Victoria's consulting business. The conversations revealed Madison's willingness to commit perjury and suborn perjury in service of her vendetta, demonstrating a level of criminal intent that shocked even her own defense attorneys. Victoria testified with remarkable composure, describing Madison's harassment campaign in clinical detail while refusing to express personal animosity toward her tormentor. Her professionalism contrasted sharply with Madison's emotional outbursts and self-serving justifications, making it clear which woman deserved the court's sympathy. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Madison was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation during which she was prohibited from contacting Victoria or me in any form. The financial penalties and restitution orders effectively bankrupted her remaining assets. But Madison's legal troubles were secondary to the physical and mental deterioration that accompanied her obsession. The stress of the trial, combined with her refusal to eat or sleep properly during her campaign against us, had taken a visible toll on her health. She appeared frail and unstable during her sentencing hearing, barely resembling the confident woman I had once loved. Victoria and I were married 2 months after Madison's conviction, in a small ceremony at Victoria's family church in Portland. The event was peaceful and joyful, attended only by people who genuinely supported our relationship. For the first time in years, I felt completely free from the shadow of my past with Madison. Our honeymoon was a 2-week trip to New Zealand, far from any reminders of the battles we had fought to protect our relationship. Victoria had always wanted to visit the country, and I found genuine pleasure in planning experiences that would make her happy rather than simply avoiding experiences that would cause me pain. Chen Consulting continued to grow during our first year of marriage, expanding into commercial real estate and corporate restructuring services. Victoria proved to be an invaluable business partner as well as a loving wife, bringing organizational skills and client management expertise that complemented my financial analysis capabilities perfectly. We purchased a larger home in Riverside Heights, a colonial-style house with enough space for the children we hoped to have together. Victoria threw herself into decorating and landscaping projects, creating the kind of warm, welcoming environment I had always imagined sharing with someone I loved. Madison was released from prison after serving 14 months of her sentence, but her return to society was anything but triumphant. Her parents had disowned her after learning the truth about her manipulation of our marriage, and her few remaining friends had distanced themselves during the trial. She had no home, no income, and no prospects for rebuilding her life. I learned about Madison's situation through mutual acquaintances who seemed to expect me to feel guilty about her circumstances. But I felt only the same pity I might feel for any stranger whose poor choices had led to predictable consequences. Madison had created her own tragedy through deliberate deception and obsessive behavior. The final chapter in Madison's story came 18 months after her release from prison. She had been living in a subsidized apartment, working part-time at a retail job, and apparently struggling with depression and anxiety disorders that had developed during her incarceration. Madison's suicide was discovered by a neighbor who noticed newspapers accumulating outside her door. She had left no note, no explanation, no final gesture toward the people she had loved or harmed during her life. Her death was as solitary and meaningless as her final years had become. I attended Madison's funeral out of respect for the childhood friendship we had once shared, but I felt no grief for the person she had chosen to become. The woman I had loved as a boy had died years earlier, killed by the same selfishness and manipulation that had ultimately destroyed her adult incarnation. Victoria accompanied me to the service, offering silent support without judgment or recrimination. She understood that I needed to witness the end of Madison's story, to confirm that the threat she had represented was truly finished. Her presence reminded me how much my life had improved since learning to distinguish genuine love from its counterfeit. We stood together at Madison's graveside as her parents wept for the daughter they had lost long before her death. Trevor Blackwood was notably absent, having moved to California and started a new life with a woman who apparently appreciated his affections. Even Madison's supposed true love had proven to be as shallow and temporary as everything else about their relationship. Walking away from Madison's funeral, I felt a profound sense of closure and gratitude. She had taught me painful lessons about trust, manipulation, and the difference between loving someone and being addicted to the idea of loving them. But she had also inadvertently led me to Victoria, whose genuine affection had healed wounds I didn't know I carried. Victoria and I now have 2 children, a son named David and a daughter named Sarah. They are growing up in a home filled with honesty, mutual respect, and the kind of authentic love that survives daily challenges rather than creating them. They will never know the story of Madison's deception except as a cautionary tale about the importance of integrity in relationships. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if Madison had simply asked for a divorce instead of orchestrating her elaborate manipulation. We might have separated amicably, remained friends, and both found happiness with more compatible partners. But Madison's need for control and her inability to accept responsibility for her choices made such an outcome impossible. The business Victoria and I built together now employs 12 people and serves clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. Our success feels meaningful because it was earned through honest work and mutual support rather than exploitation or deception. Every achievement we share reminds me how much more satisfying authentic partnership can be than the performance Madison and I had called marriage. Victoria never asks about my past with Madison, though she sometimes notices when something triggers memories of those difficult years. Her security in our relationship allows me to process those experiences without fear that my past pain will contaminate our present happiness. She understands that Madison's story is finished while ours continues to unfold. On quiet evenings, when Victoria and I sit together watching our children play in the garden she planted, I marvel at how different my life became once I learned to recognize genuine love. Madison had taught me that some people view relationships as competitions to be won rather than partnerships to be nurtured. Victoria taught me that real love makes both people stronger, safer, and more capable of creating beauty in the world. Madison's final gift to me was the contrast that made Victoria's virtues unmistakable. Without experiencing manipulation, I might not have fully appreciated honesty. Without surviving betrayal, I might not have recognized loyalty. Without escaping from false love, I might never have found the authentic version. The story that began with my discovery of Madison's deception has ended with my discovery of what love actually means when it's offered freely rather than weaponized for control. That knowledge, painful as it was to acquire, has proven to be worth every moment of suffering Madison's obsession caused. She wanted to destroy my ability to love again, but instead she destroyed only her own capacity for happiness. The ultimate justice in our story is not her punishment, but her exile from the joy that Victoria and I share every day. Madison chose revenge over redemption, and she received exactly what she demanded.